Well, okay, we can get started. It's after 9, and the topic today for the privacy roundtable, which is a regular roundtable that meets roughly monthly and discusses privacy coins and privacy techniques for cryptocurrency in general. The topic today is to review last year's roundtables in today's context, and we'll walk through the, the various spaces we had last year and talk about them and reflect. Before we do that, though, let's go through introductions. I'll start. I'm Yenachar. I'm with PivX. PivX is a proof of stake and masternode cryptocurrency that's longstanding with a wonderful community. So, Dr. Cap, please introduce yourself.
I'm Dr. Cap. I'm one of the advisors to the Particl project, which is responsible for the Particl marketplace and basic swap DEX, one of the world's most private and decentralized KYC decentralized exchanges.
Great. And Reuben?
Hey, can you guys hear me? I don't know why I lost my co-host status and speaker status just now.
Oh, you lost it? Yeah, you're loud and clear. I'll see if I can add you to co-host again.
No, that's okay. I don't need the co-host. I just making sure that I can speak, that's all. But so I'm Reuben. I'm the project steward, co-founder of Firo. We are a privacy cryptocurrency that used to be called Zcoin. We've been around since 2016, and we've built a lot of privacy protocols. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Okay, great. So we can get started then going through. 2024, it was a great year. We had lots of very good sessions. Thank you both, and I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank others who worked behind the scenes on getting this all together. CryptoGuard, AJ Dono, and Lisimic, who all help with this. So what I thought we would do today is walk through the 9 sessions. We had them roughly monthly, but there were 3 months we didn't have one, and go over them and reflect on them from today's context. A lot has happened, right? A lot has happened just here recently. The Tornado Cash, the FinCEN rule got overturned in court in the U.S., and we've had elections that are transformative for crypto and so forth. So we can talk about all this in the context of that. It's the thinking. So let's start with last January, and I'll give a little intro for each session, and we can reflect and see how it was. Last January, we had when Sean Phillips from Vail joined us as a guest, and we talked about the topic was Binance's monitoring tags and more, and we did talk about more. We talked a lot about listing, the impact of MiCA regulations. Reuben, you talked about Huobi issues, and Firo, the incoming outgoing view key and how that contributed. And I thought, Reuben, this would be a very good one for you to reflect on. It's been a year since the Binance and other listing concerns. How have things changed since then?
I guess there's a mixed bag. On the one hand, we have kept our listing. Binance has informed us that we're not in any immediate danger of delisting. But at the same time, the monitoring tag has been on us for more than a year. And those that aren't aware think that because the monitoring tag, unfortunately, is given for a variety of reasons, right? One is the project sucks, a bit scammy, we're looking at it, liquidity is low, or any sort of reason, right? And obviously for us, it's because we're a privacy coin. We've been flagged by regulators. Zcash has the monitoring tag. We have the monitoring tag. And although we've introduced exchange addresses, which looks to satisfy MiCA regulations, and also a bunch of new regulations seems to be still compliant. At the same time, because of the regulatory uncertainty with the interpretation of MiCA, because there is although in my opinion it satisfies, and in Binance's opinion it satisfies the rules, it also depends on how the regulators interpret that, right? So that's one of the big
Right.
reasons. Because you can take a very conservative approach and say, yeah, this means we have no privacy coins whatsoever. And there are also additional regulations coming into force, which is like the any money laundering regulations, which I think fully come into force maybe in 2026 or something like that, or sometime in 2026, or was it 2027? Which seemed, if you read it very, you could read it in a very conservative way and say, oh, this means that no privacy coins can be traded. While another reading of it is that, well, it can exist in this kind of circumstances. So I think Binance is just being very careful, in the sense that they don't want to be seen as removing the monitoring tag prematurely because of the uncertainty, which is really unfortunate, right? And
Right.
it's a difficult position because if Binance pushes the issues, regulators are just lazy, right? If you keep pushing the issue, they'll be like, yeah, just remove it, right? They are not trying to stir up the pot as well. I mean, this is my guess, right? And at the same time, because of the regulatory uncertainty, there's no very definitive thing, right? So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I also saw even Monero got delisted. They're still looking at the implications of MiCA because they are very far-ranging. And we also actually recently saw Komodo Wallet, which used to be called Komodo DEX, also start implementing some sort of money laundering thing on their DEX, which is a big surprise to us.
Yeah.
Again, citing MiCA and US upcoming rules. So I'm kind of interested to see how the regulations develop, how regulators would interpret all of this, and whether there'll be actually any sort of challenge from the community. I mean, yes, we have seen some good stuff happening with the Tornado Cash ruling overturned, but I still think it's a bit too early to celebrate. I think it's just basically that one was just so obviously wrong, right?
Right.
But when you talk about should we have anti-money laundering? Should we have KYC? That's a bit harder to fight because what the Tornado Cash one was fighting about said, can you sanction a smart contract? And the Supreme Court said no. So a lot of
It
people
was just
are
overreach of the powers that
yes, it's overreach of
FinCEN
power.
was given. Right. Right.
Correct. It is not answering the question to say, oh yeah, privacy coins or privacy tools are kosher now. They can still say that, centralized exchange should not be dealing with this sort of stuff. So I don't know. I guess I am, I guess a bit wary to call the shots here. Obviously, hopefully more people with the new administration, there are people that will be more likely to fight for privacy. I mean, definitely better than the previous administration. But at the same time, although we're talking about the year wrap up, I feel like the elephant in the room is all this Trump coins and Melania coins are basically sucking all the attention to them.
It's
And
true. They did.
what kind of precedent does it set for other kind of celebrities and influencers to launch their own coins, right? But yeah, I wouldn't
Totally.
derail the topic. I just thought it was a very interesting thing to kind of note. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks, Reuben. That sounds good. Dr. Cap, any thoughts on listings changes and exchanges issues?
Yeah, I think we have we have a new US administration. We have new people in power. Okay, a lot of these new people were the same people from 8 years ago. But the way I'd look at it is who in terms of if you look at who's dictating the flow of financial regulation, or at least if you think of it as if you go, well, is the US, exerting global political pressure on our global financial climate? The answer is yes. Now, who's currently in power? It's Donald Trump. Who has helped bring Donald Trump into power? Well, you can infer that by the people he's been appealing to. He came out right and said, I'd free Ross Ulbricht on day one. It's a bit weird because I was kind of doubting. I was asking this question a couple of hours ago in my head, and then literally about 30 minutes before this podcast, he's delivered on that promise. Apparently, Ross Ulbricht's a free man.
Yes,
I
yes, he
think
is.
there is a genuine push, or at least there's a genuine. I think that the people who are in this president's ear are perhaps a bit more libertarian, or I hope they are. And I'm hopeful that we see.
They do seem to be.
Yeah, I'm genuinely hopeful we see a much more deregulated cryptocurrency environment. And it's interesting you guys mentioned Melania coin, Trump coin. I think we are going to see a lot of liquidity traps, and this is what I call pump and dump meme coins. They are liquidity traps if you don't know what you're doing with them. I think you're going to see potential proliferation of that. I think you're going to see potentially a lot of new projects appearing, and you may even see a rerun of ICO mania. I think that's a real possibility to look out for. Meme coin mania, ICO mania. And I think in a deregulated environment, you'll see a lot of this occur. I think it may wind up being easier for privacy coins. I have some hesitation about this because, just because an environment is deregulated for the flow of liquidity doesn't necessarily mean it's deregulated for privacy or for the support of privacy. So I remain slightly guarded, but at the same time, let's see how things go. We've got a whole year ahead of us.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I'll give my input on.
Quick one, Cap.
Yes.
Yes. I'm just wondering. So I'm not sure if you saw like the Komodo wallets post, but and I also had some discussions with them because we were kind of blindsided, and they decided to disable all their seed nodes because they were run by some notarian nodes that were part of the Komodo network. And obviously, the thing that they cited why they did it and why they disabled the DEX was because they saw MiCA rules. There's this one thing to say, oh, if I am transmitting a transaction on behalf of someone else, even though I don't have custody, I am considered a CAPS. That means, like basically a virtual asset service provider or something like that, right? So, and that's why they said, well, if we're CAPS, then we have to do some sort of need to do travel rule, we need to do some sort of AML and all of this. I mean, obviously this has, I would say, some sort of impact on basic swap because it also not just says transaction, it says orders. So let's say if you have a decentralized order book and you have nodes that are propagating orders through this network, what is your take? Like, are you just saying, "Oh yeah, I'm not in Europe, so it doesn't apply to me"? Like, have you guys thought about it? I'm not trying to put you guys on the spot, but I think it's a really important question to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's actually a really good one to ask. So my understanding, this relates to the Inland Revenue Service rules that are set to be incorporated in sort of mid-2026. Is that right?
Oh no, these are actually MiCA rules, the
Okay.
European one.
I mean, if you want to sorry, that's a misunderstanding. I'm also aware of sort of some. Basically, there's a set of rules proposed by the IRS that basically amount to a similar outcome. Our interpretation of so we sought legal advice with regards to basic swap DEX. If you run it as a server instance, then actually it's interesting what you say. Basically, our argument was that if you run basic swap DEX, you're effectively running it as a server instance, and it's just a messaging service. So technically, it's much more rather than being a DEX, it's actually much more analogous to a network like the Swift network, which is just a message that passes messages back and forth between senders and receivers. But and those messages may carry information about exchanges, but it's a non-custodian service, essentially what the Swift network is. So I think it's interesting because, if Micah was, how are you? I think the question is, if you take that sort of regulatory framework and then decide to implement it that way, are you then going to apply it to something like the Swift network, which would be, I think, is a fair analogy to basic swap decks? And I think if that's the way that law is going to be interpreted,
or even email for that matter,
or even
right?
email it. Yeah, exactly. Well, atomic swaps, the original designs were just functioning via email, that kind of thing. So I think it's, if we're going to take that sort of interpretation, then the question is that actually going to be applied fairly and equally across all service providers? And if so, then then I think we're going to see broader problems with global liquidity emerge. And, I think you're going to see significant pushback. If it's applied unfairly or unequally, then I think, again, there is room for pushback. So I do think, I think there is room for a legal challenge. And I think I'm kind of the view that we'll see where we are when the time comes for that. We're not implementing KYC on our decks. I think it would be very difficult to, if you look at the structural design of our decks. Our order book is dependent on lots and lots of different nodes to construct it. And there is no single individual that is in charge of those nodes, so we can't just switch them off through a central button. So yeah, we'll see. But I appreciate what you're saying there. But I think it's illegal. I think that application could have some interesting ramifications.
Yeah, because then if I'm running a node and I'm relaying transactions, right? It's like, yeah, of course I can say maybe I'm not on behalf, but those are not my transactions. So does that mean that every Bitcoin node is a catch now, right? That doesn't quite make sense, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. If a Bitcoin node is suddenly routing, some censored address, has it broken the law? And that's not something that you can really control. So I think this falls back to, the overreach aspect of things. I think we'll probably, if the regulation is applied in that manner, we will probably have to come together and put up a legal challenge and, ask, is this actually a valid law, or is this a valid implementation of said regulations? I think that's the thing that needs to be.
Yeah, makes you want. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Reuben.
No, it just makes you wonder whether we should be passive about it, right? Because a lot of times we've been very regulatory action. There's something, then we respond, but by that time, the interpretation, the people have already decided what they need to do, and we're just on the defense, right? And I feel in this case, maybe this is something that we should be instead of going down the Komodo road, oh my God, I'm so scared. And I don't blame them. None of them want to go to jail or get fined or stuff like that, right? But maybe I feel in this kind of situation, it may actually make sense to be dealing with it proactively, especially those projects with the financial resources and connections to make it happen. But a lot of places like Coin Center, they don't have a EU focus, and that's really sad because all these MiCA rules were kind of passed without very much feedback. There was a very limited feedback period from the public, and a lot of this just went under the radar, and suddenly, bam, it's here. Oh yeah, privacy coins are now non-kosher and stuff like that. And so yeah, I mean, I'm just hope that maybe we can find some way to maybe band together all the privacy projects to deal with it before it actually becomes a problem.
I think the way forward is we need to unite with the same people who are pressuring the US government to free Ross Ulbricht and say, yeah, we need to have, a loose and light implementation of these sorts of regulations, or even just claw them back entirely. We should be actively lobbying. We should be actively organizing. How we go about doing that. And the next steps for it. Actually, I'm genuinely keen to know. What would you suggest?
Yeah, I don't know, because the thing is that we can lobby the US, but then it doesn't affect the EU regulations that have already been passed and coming into force. And
yeah,
all
I,
these exchanges.
Does Europe have a coin center or like
No,
advocates like that?
not that I know of. There probably is, but I haven't seen one that is pretty like outspoken.
Wow,
I
that's amazing in and of itself. That might be the place to start. Is somebody should organize like an advocacy group
Yep. Anyway,
in
go ahead.
Europe.
Sorry, I
no,
interrupted you just now.
well, no, I was just going to say, I think it highlight the fact that you were saying it was passed in relative secrecy. It kind of highlights how obscure the EU democratic process is. It is highly bureaucratic. It's highly technocratic. Um, you know, uh, it is not. It's not something which is easy for your average citizen to take part in. But I think you're right. I think we do need to have much stronger advocacy group. We need to have much stronger global and European advocacy for privacy. Um,
Right.
and I think there are my instinctive reaction would be let's have a discussion with Liberty. They're based in the UK and they're privacy advocates. And yes, the UK doesn't have as strong a link to the EU as it used to, but it's a good starting point. Um, I think I also do think it is worth, putting pressure on the US can put pressure on Europe. So, and I think it's not just the US, but I think Asia, I think the rest of the world can put pressure on Europe. So it really comes down to what the overriding global dialogue around privacy is, and how you go about sort of making that happen. And that the direction you take for that is interesting. I do think this is a question about US European geopolitics, um, and Europe is in an interesting place right now because there are lots of areas where at least on the surface, I don't think it naturally aligns with what I suspect the Donald Trump presidency has in its intentions. But again, this is a different. Sorry, I'm going to stop talking because I could just go on.
I mean, just on the first top,
Right,
there's
right.
a
We're on
lot
the
there.
first. So we'll move. I did have a couple things I just wanted to add to the to the exchange matter related to PIVX. PIVX has worked hard over the last year to get on more exchanges. So that's actually been an undertaking we've made tied to this. And one other point I wanted to make, I think an important thing that happened over the last year was Monero's surviving delisting. And in fact, surviving and kind of even transcending, right? It's like setting new local highs and
Do
so
you think
forth.
so?
And I think so. You don't you think it's been hurt
I mean, I
by
think,
that?
of course, price-wise, let's face it, it hasn't done amazingly well. It's been floating and only like really recently it's kind of held over the 200 mark, right? But then, liquidity definitely has dropped, right? And most of the liquidity is like concentrated at places like Whitebit, and Kraken is one of them, and
Yeah.
KuCoin, right? Now, okay, now with MiCA regulations coming up, I think Whitebit, if I'm not mistaken, is European, and Kraken, I know it's already, starting to delist, Monero in some of the EU jurisdictions, probably pretty soon. I mean, I just can't see a way they will comply.
Right.
And the DEX solution there is still. And look, I'm not meaning this to like throw shade at Monero. It's a challenge that we're all facing, right? But it's just that they are the number one privacy coin, and how are they faring? Like, right now, what's their DEX solution like? Haveno, everyone's still talking about Sterai, right? But that's
Sarai.
still,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I guess like I'm optimistically hopeful, but at the same time, it's still going to be a tricky one, right? So,
Well,
yeah.
I'm personally encouraged by the fact that it's done as well as it has, despite just like walking away from all the official listings. I mean, it's holding its value. you know what it's worth. There's actually a little bit of a kink there because, as I understand it, the street price of Monero is actually higher than the exchange price, which is if you go somewhere and trade with an individual, it winds up going for a higher price. But it's continuing to survive despite basically thumbing its nose at all this is overall a positive, I think. I don't think it's necessary or even best for everybody to take that path, but the fact that they've taken that path and they're doing as well as they have is an overall positive. It's encouraging to me because it's at a minimum a plan B for everyone, and it also has an influence over the hardness versus softness of regulations, right? It's looking like there's an element to which if they come down too hard, it's not enforceable. So anyway, but thanks, Reuben. Good points too. That maybe it's not unscathed either. Well, let's move on to the next one. So that was January. In February, we it's tying into this a little bit because we had on Alex Romanov from Beam and Joel Valenzuela representing Dash, and we talked about alternatives to centralized exchanges. And we also heard some about Beam, and Joel spoke against KYC, tying into what we just discussed. And of course, Joel, one of his big things is he lives off of crypto, and he pointed out a lot of people who do that can't KYC at all. I mean, there are people who just can't even KYC, and we talked about delistings and touched on CBDCs. Like Dr. Cap, you've always been a little bit more positive on CBDCs than the rest of us, and maybe we can update on that. And we talked about how DEXs are good and basic swaps DEXs. So, Dr. Cap, let's. Have your thoughts on CBDCs changed any since then? And what do you think of the DEX situation?
So my thoughts on CBDCs haven't changed, and they're positive in that I think they're a boon for privacy-focused decentralized exchanges. I've been quite open in my views that I think we're going to see the emergence of two distinct global liquidity systems over ecosystems: the public liquidity ecosystem, which I think will be led by CBDCs, Bitcoin, Ethereum, public blockchains. Essentially, they will be fully surveilled, fully traceable, and you'll probably see things on them that a lot of privacy advocates and enthusiasts won't like, or even libertarians, like automated taxation, automated freezing of accounts. I can see that occurring on CBDCs.
It sounds awful.
No, but I just if you look into the mindset of a certain type of politician, this is their dream, and that's kind of I see that as being a thing, and I suspect there'll be some pushback, but I suspect it will eventually cede, and I think that will drive demand for liquidity ecosystems that are private, where no third parties are watching who is trading with who, where no third party can impose sudden freezes on funds, or automated taxation, or automated routing into a certain smart contract that does X, Y, and Z. So I think there will be I think it will fuel demand for these ecosystems, and it's nice because a year ago basic swap DEX. It's interesting we were talking about Monero getting, delisted in liquidity. A year ago, basic swap DEX, was very much, a hobbyist's project. I think that's a fair sum. It's a decentralized exchange with a fully decentralized distributed order book, that has no KYC, that supports atomic swap for Monero. In the course of the year, we're supporting, supports atomic swaps for coins that lack programmable inputs. So, that means RDEX supports Mimblewimble atomic swaps. RDEX supports Monero atomic swaps. RDEX supports atomic swaps for coins that couldn't support atomic swaps until RDEX came along. Now, what's happened over the course of the year is we've done a lot of development that's brought it to a stable release. The liquidity on RDEX is getting better. And actually, what's really exciting to me is that, we've kind of solved we've conceptually now solved one of the biggest problems with atomic swaps, which is how do you actually bring atomic swaps to mobile phones and mobile platforms? Because the two biggest problems with atomic swaps, and this applies to all atomic swap-based DEXs, is they require persistence, which is that you need to your application needs to stay online for the duration of the swap to exchange all the required messages for a swap to go through. And you need lots of storage because you need to download chains and sync them. So you need to download your Bitcoin blockchain and download your Monero blockchain and download your Litecoin chain if you want to actually sync those nodes to the DEX, if you actually want to start swapping them, because it's all reliant on messages being passed directly between chains. Well, we've kind of conceptually solved the requirements for persistence and the requirements for storage. So we kind of have started working on, mobile compatible atomic swaps, and we're kind of planning to deliver. Hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have a swap service that utilizes KYC-free atomic swaps on mobile phones and on mobile platforms without any compromises on decentralization or privacy. So actually, I know you mentioned Soridex, but actually we're also a pretty big project to look at over this year when it comes to being a haven of liquidity. Havinodex, by the way, haven of liquidity for Monero and other privacy coins. So I don't really worry too much about the regulations to an extent. I look to inspiration from a good source of, at the Litecoin Summit, which we were fortunate enough to do earlier in July last year. It was the father of PGB privacy gave a talk, and whilst his take home was we should engage in more direct advocacy, in support of privacy, for governments. Actually, if you look at how PGP came about, it was just a technology that was so good that it became, and so easy to use, that it became ubiquitous. And by the time governments got around to saying, hang on, what is this? We don't want it. Private businesses were saying, we absolutely need it. So I think I look at, I look at where we're at, and I see, as I said, I see two liquidity systems emerging. And, for me, the big thing is, how do we bridge these two? And I think, the DEXs will find a way. So I'm optimistic still, and my view remains unchanged.
Oh, well, good. That's a good take. Thanks. Reuben, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess I'm much more pessimistic, mainly because I feel that all these surveillance systems will come into being and will be normalized, and most people will be like, oh yes, cashless is so amazing, all these things are great, right? And the things that most people are not going to object, like, I've seen in my own country, everyone's moving cashless because it's convenient. I don't have to carry little coins and weird change and deal with it. And I also find myself like, wow, yeah, it's really useful, right? It's so easy to just get the e-wallet, and I don't have to bring any sort of cash, right? But then no one's like, I would say like 99.9% of people are going to be, yeah, this system is great. I don't see the privacy risk. They're not even thinking about it. But for the people like me, right, like my bank account has been frozen. It's still frozen. It's been frozen for more than 2 months.
It's terrible.
And I can't access my money, and it's over amount of what, $400. My whole entire account is frozen, right? And even the police have cleared me, but the banks are like, no, we're not. We have to wait till the investigation is complete. And I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. I mean, and I throughout my life, I've been the target, right? Like, I was running a VPN service, PayPal froze my funds, my payment processor froze my funds, the banks denied my credit card access and all this other stuff. I have friends that, are in similar type of systems, but we are the very small minority, and no one for the moment really gives a crap besides the privacy people. And we are a small group of people. And I am really worried that by the time that people wake up, all these systems have been normalized, right? I mean, like KYC, AML didn't really used to be the norm. This thing just crept in and
That's right.
everyone just went, oh, now we're like, oh yeah, we have to do AML, KYC, right? Like we just accept it as kind of like, yeah, this is how the world works, when there wasn't really a huge kickback, right? We had all those, bank privacy stuff eroded very slowly, and suddenly, bam! When we realized it, it's all entrenched. So, yeah, I mean, that's my take. Basically, that I feel these systems are coming. They're already slowly being normalized. People don't really realize it, and by the time we want to fight back, it's going to be very hard to undo because it's already part of the fabric of life. So that's my take. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a good take. That really paints a picture. It's interesting how there are regional differences in that. You're right. A lot of the world is just moving over to like cashless payment. China is big that way. And Dr. Cap, you're in India right now. You probably encounter everybody wanting GPay, right? India is really embracing that. But there are places that are holding out. I think Japan is a big holdout. Cash is big in Japan, and cash remains big in the U.S. I think, of course, it's not the only thing, but I can't imagine people giving it up. So there's you really paint a picture, and it's important that we push back against this, because otherwise it just seems like a surveillance dystopia is coming. And I agree, Reuben.
Yeah, like I don't know, if, I probably brought this up, but then like this year, or was it next year, we with our Malaysian system, and this is also modeled after other countries. So this is also happening in other countries where every single transaction we make has to be directly reported to the Inland Revenue Board. What is it for? What is this transaction? I make a payment, I buy a cup of coffee. It's reported automatically.
Reported centrally.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? Very, very, very unfortunate, because what people miss out on is how really that is disempowering. If you have to report every transaction to a central authority, you're giving that central authority power that really belongs to you, right?
And we have to realize that governments are corrupt. I mean, like even the best ones, there's always going to be some sort of corruption. And this information is a freaking gold mine. It's also a national security issue. Just imagine.
Yes, because they're corrupt and incompetent, right?
Exactly.
They get hacked.
Like our Malaysian government, they release something to, let's give out our identity numbers, to submit all your information. This is going to be mandatory for the, if you want to get like government services. And then within day one, it was hacked and all the information was leaked. So I'm just like, wow,
Terrible.
Okay, these are the people that we want to trust our entire financial transaction data with, so yeah. Anyway, let's move on. I don't want to talk too much about this.
No, we'll get worked up. No, but yep, that's right. That's part of why we're here, right? We're fighting back against it. Well, let's move on to March. So that was February, and March kind of ties into it a little bit, because we had Alex from Beam on, and we talked about leveraging crypto to improve voting and governance. And I think, and like Dr. Cap, you pointed out that just voting and governance could be its own series, and how important this is. So we can probably spend a little time talking about it now. I also think that that a very new development is the rapidly increasing power of AI as we discuss governance. It came up in that talk how human involvement is the hardest thing to manage in a DAO. Anything that's like pure logic and transfer of funds or transactions, you can manage with a smart contract, but you can't manage human activities well. And I think that's an area where we could bring in, AI. AI is improving really rapidly, arguably more rapidly than people anticipated. And AI may have a role going forward, being involved in smart contracts to manage human activities. I think that's something that's changed since we had that talk. We talked some about like the importance of shared secrets, I think, which is a very big question. And I remember, and Alex mentioned, one thing they have with Beam is time limited changes, like with DAOs. there may be something that can be changed by people, the people with the right authority and the right private keys, but they can only be changed after a certain amount of time, which gives some stability to the system. And Reuben discussed Dash's DAO in that one, because Reuben has a history with Dash, and that was very insightful, and discussed some of the problems of like a pure more coins, more votes model. So I kind of gave like my take. The big thing that's changed there is the advent of rapidly improving AI and how we have a future of integrating it with smart contracts, probably through an oracle mechanism, to better manage human activities. You guys have any thoughts on how things with DAOs and governance have changed since last March?
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting. Over the sort of last 12 months, we actually implemented an LLM into the Particl marketplace, and it basically can scan listings based on descriptions and keywords, and it doesn't vote them off, but it just flags them up for review. So the community still has to vote them off. So it automates certain aspects of moderation.
Very cool.
So that's pretty interesting. It's really interesting when talking about governance, because I'm actually in the middle of writing a proposal which is basically for our project, for the Particl project, to say, let's scrap our decentralized treasury. So with the Particl project has the Particl blockchain. About 50% of the block reward currently goes to this treasury, and it's voted on by the community. And by the community, that's people who are staking on the Particl blockchain, how that gets spent. Based on proposals that are put forth. I'm actually about to put a proposal saying we need to get rid of this for various reasons.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a big step.
And actually, I'm also partly because there's a lot of philosophy behind this that reflects how my own views on governance have changed, but a lot of it is towards making the Particl blockchain closer from the Particl blockchain. For those who don't know, and probably that's most of you, it's a proof of stake blockchain with a 6% per annum supply inflation rate in perpetuity, about half of which currently goes to the fund, to this decentralized fund. What I'm basically going to be putting forward is we scrap that treasury, lower the inflation rate immediately from 6% to 3%. So effectively, stakers are not affected. Their effective staking returns remain unchanged. And then to progressively reduce it by 0.5% per year over a 6-year period to 0.5% in perpetuity. But for another discussion to say, let's get rid of that and have a proof of stake network with 0% supply inflation, as long as we've got an environment where non-speculative usage and speculative usage creates enough transaction activity to generate fees, and enough fees of enough value to actually create a meaningful security budget. Sorry, that was a lot to say in less than a minute, but we've been thinking, certainly within the team and within our community, we've been thinking hard about governance and funding in relation to governance. And I think it's a really interesting question for projects moving forward. Do you want to be hard currency? Do you want to be soft currency? Do you want to be soft currency with hard characteristics, or the other way around? What is the philosophy of your project? And I think it's a good time,
Define soft currency and hard currency in that context.
So to me, hard currency is, this currency has a hard fixed supply. It has very fixed characteristics. It doesn't follow the traditional sort of central banking mechanism of every year, we are planning for 2% inflation, i.e. your savings will effectively devalue. If you have $100,000 of savings, actually in real term spending power at the end of the year, we're targeting a devaluation of that by around 2%. That's traditional sort of fiat central banking currency. And I consider that soft currency because you can hold that same value, a fixed value of 100K over a 10-year period, and it will depreciate by, assuming inflation is 2% per annum, it will depreciate by 2% compounded over 10 years. So actually, people who do not have asset wealth such as stocks, shares, stocks, shares, gold, property. People who basically just work for a living and put their money and don't, put their money into savings. They're the ones who always lose out in this sort of system, and you actually see that. You've seen that
That's right.
heavily in the
Yes.
last 5 years, where massive spiking inflation and massive rises in the cost of living has basically crippled people in working and middle classes, and really caught them off guard.
100%.
And that's created rising civil unrest. And also, it's also created, I also think it's a massive contributor to, low productivity and low economic growth, because if you have a massively stressed out population, they don't have time to be creative, so they don't really have time to be productive. I mean, they're being as productive as you can be, and you're effectively, still slicing at them. You're still slicing beyond the last piece of fat that they had, and you're now cutting into their bones. So I think soft currency systems, they eventually implode over time. That's my concern. And I think our experience with Particl is it's adopted a soft currency mechanism, and its liquidity has just shrunk over time. There are other reasons for that, but I think a big driver for that is a high inflation rate, and this model that has, we've always used to argue that it's been decentralized, but I'm willing to accept that when you create a centrally managed source of funds, even if the management of that's decentralized, then is determined by voting, that you still have the issue, as Reuben pointed out, of more coins, more votes. And in a proof of stake system, that's very tricky. I'll stop because I could keep going on. Sorry.
Well, very quick question. So presumably you think of Bitcoin as hard. I mean, or not just you, but it fits the definition of hard, because
I'm going to say something controversial. I'm going to say something controversial right now, because the supply is still inflating. It's a soft currency, but you're right. It will eventually become a hard currency.
How about Ethereum? It tends to not be inflation.
Ironically, and I'm going to full disclosure, I hold ETH. I've held ETH since 2016. Ironically, Ethereum, at the moment, even though its issuance is essentially matching its burn, so its supply rates remained unchanged. So even though it's adopted it's adopted an economic policy that's very easily interpretable as a soft economic policy, it's resulted in strangely enough, a hard outcome, which is the supply, at least for now. In practice, it's currently at this time, it's a hard currency.
It's hard.
I'm not going to tell you that that's going to stay like that forever. It may become a deflationary currency if burn rate exceeds issuance. If issuance exceeds burn rate, it'll be an inflationary currency and become soft. It's an interesting case. But for now, it's a hard currency. Bitcoin will become a hard currency, provided they stick to a 21 million coin hard cap, around 2100 when that hits. So, but again, that feeds back into discussions about security budget, transaction network, L1 transaction fees, how much of your security is subsidized by issuance versus how much is subsidized by usage of the network. Those are factors to consider when you're constructing hard money policy, soft money policies, policies. Sorry, that makes me sound like a central banker. But when you're considering hard money, soft policy design, those are things to consider.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Good insights. Reuben, what are your thoughts?
I mean, the dirty mind in me, when I keep hearing hard, soft, and I'm thinking about something else. But
just wait till we come to the debate whether it should be kex or sex.
But I mean, I don't have deep insights on this, but I know when you were talking about the combination of AI and governance, I don't know how many of you guys play Helldivers, but there's this concept of managed democracy where you input your what you like, you answer a few questions, and the AI will decide which way to vote for you, which was okay. So I mean that brought me some ideas on that. But I think there's one comment that I would like to make, which is kind of, I would say, current, which is, we tend to think of Ethereum as one of the projects that is, I would say, like, reasonably decentralized in governance. I mean, obviously Vitalik has, a large say, but it's not like, this iron fist or like, this dictator who just like gets to push and drive everything, right? But I mean, like, just recently, I don't know if you saw the drama, but Vitalik's just saying like, no, I have the right.
I get to pick.
I
Yep.
get to pick who is leading the Ethereum Foundation, right? And well, I mean, like, well, if that's the case, then I mean, obviously, I know where he's coming from. I understand his point of view, but that's also like doesn't really bode well, right? I mean, like, Ethereum was and for someone like Vitalik who has been talking about the inadequacies of coin voting and all these various methods of DAO governance and all these ideas, and those posts aren't new. Those posts have been, several years old. There was talk about plutocracy and all this other. Then there's this thing where Futaki or something like that, and we haven't really seen any sort of real innovation or like movement towards this new governance systems. I don't see anyone really trying it out, like, new forms of coin voting, or you vote and then it's given a weight based on, how successful that decision was. And it's kind of unfortunate, right? Like,
Why do you think that is?
Because it's difficult, because all these systems are very hard to factor into. How do you quantify it? And then like you talk about, oh yeah, it sounds good in theory, but then people can game it, right? So
Yep.
again, it just goes back to like, like we know that first past the post voting kind of sucks, but it's simple. People get it and people accept the results, even though it's a very flawed way of voting, right? I mean, we have like, ranked voting and all these other ways which are much better. And obviously they have their own flaws, but it's like every time you want to solve it, it adds complexity. It makes people like, what is all of this? And then you have another issue where people don't know what the heck they're voting for, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any like big insights on that, but I'm just like a note like, hey, we haven't really made much progress in terms of DAO governance, and even like one of the top leaders of DAO governance is saying that I choose who should be on the Ethereum Foundation. I mean, yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
I'm going to say, yeah, the optics of that tweet was so bad. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think here's me. I think, he's the head of the Ethereum Foundation, but perhaps he should hire a PR manager or someone to just, say, hey, Vitalik, I know you're mad that everyone's been attacking your personal preference for the, for whatever it is, whatever executive post. And, some of those attacks on Ayami Kikuchi, I don't know, have been very, very personal and quite nasty. But yeah, it felt like an unveiling. Speaking in anger, I don't think that's a great thing. And you're right, governance is hard. Governance is so hard. Sorry, I'll stop.
Just out of interest, does anyone know what this Milady? I mean, I know Milady is an NFT, but like, I don't know why Vitalik like is going like Milady, and I'm like, then I saw some explanation that Milady is the representative of cypherpunk. I'm like, really? So I think I'm missing something there. I don't know if you guys understand.
Some people are hardcore about that. I've noticed that too. I just assumed it was like a community, like an NFT community. I know Gabriel Shapiro, Lexnode, he's big on Milady too.
Yeah. Oh well.
There is one point I wanted to add to the like, the ranked choice voting and quadratic voting and all that. It's an excellent point, Reuben, that it winds up being too confusing to people often. It's easy to just pick your favorite. It's hard to rank and it's hard to distribute points, for humans. But for AI agents, it is really easy. Give them, you say, here's some options, vote, rank these. Don't just rank them, give them all a score. And it's just as easy as asking for the favorite. So even though these advanced voting mechanisms don't always fit the human mind so well, they might going forward fit AI agents really well.
Yeah, so basically you're saying managed democracy like the Helldivers where you just like
Yeah,
input what
yeah,
you think and
right.
let the AI decide it for you.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, that is one of the paths forward. There is a universe where that's how it unfolds. So let's do. We're coming up. We're short on time. We've got 3 minutes.
I have a hard
And
stop at
we
11. Yeah, but I mean just letting you know I have to drop out in 3 minutes. Yeah.
well, let's in 3 minutes. Let's see if anyone has any questions. Any of our our listeners. If anyone has a question, they can raise their hand. Do you see any? I don't
Had
see any
a
questions.
I seen someone's requested to speak. Let's exchange. So let's see what they got to
Oh,
say.
yes.
Hey, GM. Thanks for having us. I just wanted to say hi. We will be. Can I drop some alpha on this AMA? That's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So next couple of weeks we'll be having a campaign together with Pivix and other privacy-centered coins. And I see Fyro, one of the listeners as well. So we're sending an invite today. So yeah, if you haven't subscribed to Let's Exchange, you can do so now. And we also have AMA, and I would like to use this opportunity to invite you as well to our AMA, maybe in a couple of weeks, to talk about your recent updates as well.
Yeah, definitely. Just send me a DM. More than happy to. That'd be great.
Yeah, same.
Okay, great. Yep. Thank you. Okay, well, we're coming up on the hour, and Reuben has a hard stop, so we'll end it there. Very good session. We didn't get through all 9. Maybe we have an opportunity to cover the rest at another time, but it was really great going over those 3. Lots of good insights. Dr. Cap, Reuben, thank you.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you all for joining.
Thanks,
Bye.
Yenachar, and thanks, Reuben. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.